Hello, afternoon. It's part 3 of my XJW Jehovah's Witness exit story. I think I got to the point yesterday where I was coming up to my teenage years, which is where everything sort of changed. As I said, my mum sort of tried to leave the faith, as it were. When I was about 11, she left my dad, and it was all a bit of a shock and a bit of upset. Well, eventually, because part of what brought all this on was the fact that, as I said, my mum had an extramarital affair, but there's another sort of difficult situation with that, is that my dad at the time was only living with us part-time. He'd taken a job where he'd had to go away during the week and only came back to us on weekends, and it was supposed to be, I think, for a few months, and it turned into, I think it's only meant to be like 3 or 4 months, and then this 3 or 4 months turned into the best part of a year, and I can only assume it was good money or anything, but he was basically spending his weeks in hotels, being wined and dined in the hotels. And, I think initially he went to stay with a witness family. And I think that was around the time my parents split up as well. So he was initially staying with a witness family in Scotland. And then he came home again, obviously, to the shock of having all the stuff in the house gone. My mum had literally left him, I think, with a table and a chair and an armchair and things like that. It was all a bit. And he eventually talked her into coming home again. So we all moved back into the family home, and my dad had actually painted our room and things like that. He, sort of tried to, in his way, make up for things like trying to buy us stuff and that we'd not had before, and try and treat my mum and things like that. But I think damage had already been done. The whole thing was a real mess, and it just wasn't going to happen. It wasn't going to work. And basically, my dad, I think he came back for a while, and then he was off again to another city. I think it was just from Manchester or somewhere like that. And he was again coming home at weekends. And sort of almost living the single life. He wasn't staying with a witness family this time. I don't know what he was going up to there. One has to wonder. But like he'd sort of come home and expect us to be all these perfect children. We hadn't seen him for a week, and you just expect everything to be normal, and it kind of wasn't, But we got used to it. It was quite a while that he was sort of living with us part-time. And then eventually, my parents did finally end the marriage. And it was quite unpleasant and acrimonious, and I think they were trying to do what's right by us. And I don't know, I think there'd been other relationships again. I don't know. Again, I think it was possibly my mum. I don't know. Lots been swept under the carpet, and I don't like to pry, and it's humans are humans, and humans make mistakes, and we have to learn to sort of forgive those mistakes, because we might make the same ones ourselves. You don't know. You can never sit in judgment over another person. It's wrong. To me, that's what witnesses are all right. You sit in judgment, you're better than them because they did this and they did that. Well, no, you're not better than them, because you don't know what situation you're going to be in. And, you'd want people to understand you and be patient and understanding, not judgmental. And from the tidbits that I have had from family, the elders were sort of on the case with them, and that they were trying to persuade them not to split up and to be this, this nice spiritual couple who sat together in the Kingdom Hall with their children, and that's kind of what they wanted my parents to do. And of course, my parents, my dad faded first, and for him, they sort of left him alone. He left the marital home. He went off and stayed, I think, in a house share, and he started to fade. And my granddad, who by this time, this is my thin granddad, my dad's dad, who had been disfellowshipped, and my dad had kept up contact with him. Now, when the shoe was on the other foot, unfortunately, I mean, he's passed away now, but when the shoe was on the other foot, and my dad ended up getting disfellowshipped, because that did eventually happen, my dad got disfellowshipped. I think he was caught in a relationship or something. I don't know. He had loads of girlfriends. I just left the witnesses. Not for me to judge. But yeah, he got kicked out the witnesses, and so, but he got left alone. This was the thing. He got left alone. My mum is in the house with 5 children on her own, and was a target for the elders. The elders were emotionally blackmailing her. They were telling her that if she didn't come to meetings, that she was killing her children, that she, that she was a bad woman, and the only way to save herself was to come to the meetings and be nice and spiritual and go on the doors, and I would say to sometimes, because round about, I think this is all a bit difficult, because a lot of the stuff happened when I was about 13 or 14, and my mum then again tried to fade, but as I say, they were on her case all the time, and she was sort of getting into relationships as well, from non-witnesses, and I think I know of a couple of them. I think there were more. I don't know. It's not for me to judge or say or anything. I certainly know that she was trying to get out the witnesses, and she was trying to explore who she was. Like my dad was trying to explore who they were. I mean, when their parents were recruited into into the cult, they were little children. I mean, my dad was barely 5. My mum, I think, was like 2 years old. What choices did they have? They my mum was really bright. She wanted to go into grammar school. But her parents wouldn't let her. I think she passed 11 plus and was offered a grammar school place. She was denied it by her own parents, who believed that education wasn't important because God was going to kill us all anyway. Anyone who wasn't a witness, that was, well, why do you need education? God's going to get rid of this system. Who cares? And so she was denied that, although my dad was allowed to go to grammar school. So, I sort of do sort of understand from that point of view, was that, okay, my mum was denied an education she should have had. But in turn, because of that, my education got messed up. But, we're coming to that. So, I was always stuck between my dad wanting me to, I think my dad really wanted me and my siblings to have a good education, to have those opportunities. But again, he was up against the witnesses, and talking to my parents and that, they were both awake. Neither of them really believed it, but they were so scared of losing members of their family that losing members of their family was more important than getting their kids out of a cult and allowing their kids to have a normal life. And so I can't, in all honesty, say that was okay. I've said to them, I'm sure I've said to my dad before, you should have left when we were children. You knew it wasn't real. You knew it was all a load of crap. why did you stay? I know, like, I think my grandmother on my dad's side, the one who she was blind, she'd passed away when I was about 9, something like that, and that was a big shock to him. A big shock to all of us, really. But and it's difficult because they were both kind of in toxic relationships with their own parents. Both of them, really, when I look at it, when I analyse it, they were both in like toxic relationships with their parents, and yet the best thing they could have done for us was to have left the witnesses and just lived a normal life, and but then again, in those days, we're talking about the late 80s, early 90s, and there was absolutely no support if you left as a family. There was no support for you, whereas now there are measures in place. There are things that, thank goodness that there is that support out there, because, people are now leaving in droves, which, is a good thing. But in that time, it was completely devastating to my family. It was damaging my relationship with my parents, because my parents, foolish, in hindsight, was not a clever thing to have done. But they decided to let us carry on going to the meetings, because they thought, well, we ought to let them decide for themselves, what they do and what have you. But really wasn't a good idea. The better thing, really, even at our age, would have been to say, look, I'm your parent. I do not want you going to the meetings, because the more we went to the meetings, the more we were being indoctrinated. And also, the more we were exposed, this is me and my older sister, the more we were exposed to elders who were poisoning our minds against our own parents. And telling us that, I can remember going on doors with elders and them saying, well, your mother has gone over to Satan, but you still have to do what they say, even though, of course, when you get older, you'll be free of them, and putting those ideas in my head that, I once I'm old enough, leave them, and then I can become a pioneer and go to Bethel, and they were very, very clever in what they did. They sounded caring, they sounded understanding, and all that kind of thing. And what they were doing was they were manipulating, especially me, and possibly my sister as well, into, obviously becoming adult witnesses. They sort of we were sort of labelled as spiritual orphans. And I remember there was actually a talk about spiritual orphans and how we need to look after them, and how the stand they're making for Jehovah, because their parents are out, and at the time I didn't twig it was about me and my sister. Marking talks are normally the other way. Marking talks are normally about, don't associate with that person. No, this was like saying, love bomb those guys, then we can keep them in, That's kind of what it was, like a alternate marking talk, really. Quite weird. But there we are. I just didn't register. And I can remember as a teenager, and if I can't always get these things chronological, it's because things are popping up in my head that I remember. But, throughout these sort of teenage years, we're talking sort of 14 to 16. My mum was sort of made to cut, she sort of sat me down one day and said, the Kingdom Hall is going to be an announcement. And this announcement is going to say that that Sister Julie Sullivan has been publicly reproved. I was like, oh, what does that mean? I'd never heard of that before. And she said, well, it means I've done something wrong and I'm sorry. And so, because I was friends with this particular person, which I'm not going to mention the name, because I was friends with this particular person and he wasn't a witness, and so she described it as a friendship. It probably wasn't. But she sort of said, "Oh, because I'm friends with this person, I've been told off by the elders, and there's going to be an announcement at the hall and stuff like that." And so there was this announcement, and then I decided, because I think my mum had to sit with somebody and things like that. I sort of went up to one of the girls that I knew quite well, who was supporting my mum, sort of thing. And I said to her, she was only about 18, and I said, "Oh, I'd really like a study." And she says, "Oh, well, okay." So I started studying with her. And while I was studying with her, relationship between, it had already started to fracture. Teenage girls and hormones and stuff like that. It already started to fracture, but put on top of that, leaving a cult, put on top of that, your children being sort of manipulated by elders. You can imagine the relationship between myself and my mother in particular. I didn't really see a lot of my dad. I saw him about twice a week, if that, normally once a week. Was very strained, to say the least. In fact, it was pretty dire. Things were going on in the household that weren't very pleasant, and it wasn't. It was fueled. My attitude to my mother was fueled by what I was being told by the elders. She was obviously suffering from quite a lot of trauma, so she was not behaving in a way that was healthy. Let's put it politely. And those combinations are not good, especially extremely damaging on both sides. So as you can imagine, being at home was a living hell as far as I was concerned. She was also, I think at the time, trying to associate more with her mum, trying to sort of, I suppose, get support from her mum. Her mum was obviously desperate to get her out the witnesses, being a disfellowship witness. But I'm not sure they always went around things in the right way, because obviously they don't understand psychology and things like that. And so they probably drove us more into going to the meetings than pulled us away, What I feel really should have happened is when she made that decision, or when she got disfellowshipped or whatever, she should have just said, right, no meetings for anybody, and let us go absolutely bonkers and scream at her and be fearful, and just let us get it out of our systems. And within probably 6 months, we would have been celebrating Christmas like any normal person. We just, because she was sort of, I suppose she was trying to be fair, and her mind probably wasn't in the right, well, no, it wasn't in the right place. That, she may not have dealt with things in hindsight that we kind of know will work better. And to be honest, anybody who's in that situation where they're allowing their children to go to the meetings, even though they're not anymore, I wouldn't advise it. It will cause more damage in the long run. The longer they go, the more damage. The quicker you cut that off, however harsh it seems at the beginning, however harsh it seems in the beginning, it is for the best in the long run, and it will be better for your relationship with your child. I can tell you from experience of being that child who, being in that situation, that little bit of tough love at the beginning, that little bit of, we're not going to live that life anymore. They will get upset. They will be afraid, because they've all told all their lives that if they're not a witness, they're going to get killed at Armageddon. of course they're going to be upset. That's why you need that support in place. That's why you need that therapy, school support, all those bits in place that would help your child adjust. That's why you need that. Because they've got to be able to have that safe place where maybe at school where they can't talk to you about how they're feeling, but maybe there's they've got a safe space to talk about it. So yeah, it's quite it's difficult because you're trying to do the right thing, but sometimes the right thing may look like the wrong thing, but it isn't the wrong thing, it's the right thing. Weird. Anyway, so yeah, my relationship with my mother in particular was pretty dire. And she then started exploring who she was. We were quite young, sort of again 14 to 16, and she'd go out, enjoy herself. We'd babysit, and she'd come back late, early in the morning. Probably not the most sensible thing to do, but we were at home. Me and my sister were at home with 3 young children. Not the most sensible thing in the world to have done, but she did it, and I suppose she wanted to explore going out and having fun, all the things that she'd not been allowed to do. She was then doing. In fact, I think both my parents were doing that in a way. They were both exploring their freedom and probably not doing it in the most responsible of ways. But they didn't have the support of any ex-witnesses, as far as I know. They didn't have that support there to say, well, maybe tone it down, or maybe try a different way, or they didn't explore education. They didn't explore paths that might have been a bit more beneficial to them, but who am I to judge? That's kind of how it was. So we get to sort of 15, and I'm coming up to 16, and I'm about to leave school, and it's kind of looking at where to go beyond school. And we sort of struck upon the idea of, what about agricultural college? That seemed like a really interesting place. I could go and study. What about going to study horticulture? That would be a good thing to study. I'm not quite sure whether I thought of the idea or whether family thought of the idea. I'm not quite remember how it all came about, but I ended up going to agricultural college. And the good thing about it was far enough away from home that I would have to live away from home. So that really appealed to me, because getting away from my parents, even though I was like 16. And you imagine that you're stuck with all these children, and all hell is breaking loose, and your mum's like crazy and what have you, and the thought of getting away and be, I thought the idea was that I could, up my spiritual life and be a good witness, and I'd be away from all my problems. I thought it would be the end of my problems. So shortly before, I think it was the April or May, before it would be the earlier on in the year circuit assembly. I had gone to the L because I'd been having the study with this young girl, and things, because I told her what was going on in the household. She decided that she felt that she couldn't continue studying with me, that I needed older witness ladies to study with me, and I felt really kind of betrayed. But she felt she couldn't handle what I was telling her about what was happening at home, and she basically passed me on to these sort of older elderly sisters who'd never been married. I thought, actually, one had been married and had children, the other, and they were all out, and the other had the other I don't think she'd ever been married or had children, but she had all these like tapestries in the paradise all around her house, all around her flat. She'd done these tapestries, beautiful. Well, they're not tapestries, embroideries actually, because I think it was like a peak or something. But they were really beautiful, really huge. And so she sort of had, you went into her living room. It was like going into the paradise. You know, it was pretty awesome. And she, as I say, she there was another sister as well, and they both sort of passed me to and from each other a lot. And I think at that point I just felt really sort of confused. I felt I had no one to really confide in or talk to. You know, it was just like I'd sort of talk to them about things, and then they'd nod their heads and say whatever, and then I'd be passed to the other one, and they'd be passed back to the other one. And then I started to go through the question. I approached the elders about getting baptized. Oh, the other big thing that I forgot about was the reason that my mum got disfellowshipped eventually was because she'd started to have a relationship with a much younger guy who wasn't a witness, but she was about, I think it was about 15 years difference, something like that, between them. He was a lot younger than her. And she started bringing him back home, as she did. And she'd also brought him round to meet us. And obviously, me being the eldest, and like had it drummed into him that if these sorts of things are happening, you have to report it. So she was still a witness, and I spoke to my friend about it, this young girl, and they says, well, you're going to need to talk to the elders about that, And so she took me to the elders, and I had to tell the elders what had been going on. I was 15. So here I am, 15 years old, reporting on my mum. Because that's what you're trained to do. That's what you're told to do. That's being a good witness. Spy on your parents and then report back to the elders whenever they're doing anything wrong. It's just it sounds like 1984. Well, it wasn't. It was my life. And so doing that, and then when the elders came around to see her, she knew it was me. She knew it was me who told, and the way she looked at me, I'll never forget that. The way she looked at me and said, I know it was you. I know it was you that did that. She didn't have to say anything. And so, yeah, she was finally disfellowshipped. Now, I've got to think to myself, well, she'd been, from what I understand, she'd been privately reproved. She'd already been publicly reproved. So you can, and from what I know about the judicial committees, they're basically kangaroo court. So basically decided you're guilty before you even go in. It's really whether to see how sorry you were. And you're, especially if you're a woman, you're sitting there in front of three elders, one of the, who are most likely to be, who are not trained in any sort of counselling or, ways of behaving that are appropriate. And you have to sit there and tell them everything that you've done that's wrong. And I mean everything. I'm lucky. I am so lucky that I never had to sit through one of them. I managed to get out before I had to sit through one of them. But they will make you go into excruciating detail over what the thing that you've done wrong is. I don't think I need to explain quite what that would entail if you know what I mean. If you've had a relationship with somebody and it got physical, you would then have to tell the elders everything, every little detail. Not pleasant, not really acceptable. And in my view, I'm sure that is a form of abuse. Because you're making someone relive what what is a normal part of a relationship, and you're making it into something, seedy, and that's just sick. It should be none of anybody's business what two consenting people do with each other, or however many consenting people do with each other. It's none of, as long as there's consent, there shouldn't be a problem. There we go. But, so I was the one that got made to, or encouraged to, report her. And then after that, I, it came upon me, and bearing in mind I was only a couple of months off 16, it came upon me that I should get baptised, because I was about to leave school and I was going to go to college, and I thought that would be the right thing to do, would be to get baptised and protect myself. I didn't really understand what I was doing, to be honest. I'm 15, and I just thought that getting baptised was just a sort of coming of age thing that you did, and then when you did that, you were sort of available to date boys. That's kind of, the sort of impression that you got. You can't date a boy until you're baptised. And I was getting to that age where I was starting to notice boys, and of course the boys at the Kingdom Hall all dressed nicely in suits, all looked really cute, and I was just like, well, I'm of an age where I should be thinking about marriage. I'm 15. I'm thinking to myself, I should be thinking about marriage. What? Looking back on it now, it's sick. But that's the way it was. You were supposed to be sort of, you get baptized. The idea is you get baptized, you meet a nice brother, you go pioneering with him, and then you get married and you pioneer some more and maybe have a baby and pioneer some more and have another baby and pioneer some more. That's what your life's supposed to be. Pioneering, by the way, if you didn't know, is going on the doors. And pioneering isn't just like the odd hour or two. It's like a full-time job. You take a part-time job and then you pioneer, which is, but yeah, that was going to be my goal. And then I went to college. So there I am, pleasing my parents by going to college, because that's, and I decided that to please the witnesses, that I would try and find a accommodation with a witness family or brothers, lodge with a witness family, preferably. That's what I hoped. But anyway, back to the baptism thing. I went to the elders and I said, look, I want to get baptised, but I know that my mum is going to freak out if she finds out. She's going to freak out about it. So I don't want to tell her. And now any responsible elder would have turned around to me and said, well, we do need to talk this through with your mum and dad, but we'll come with you, we'll support you. That's what a responsible elder should have done. What actually happened was they said, yeah, we'll help you behind your back. I'm 15, I'm underage, I'm a minor. And they said, yeah, that's okay. You don't need to tell your mum. We'll just do it after the field service. You'll come with me on field service. It's one elder in particular. You can come with me on field service on my own with an elder, and then afterwards we'll go back to my house and we'll do the questions. Okay? Me, I'm just like, no alarm bells, nothing like that. Nothing happened, obviously. And he was, his wife was in the house and he was a nice guy. And, one of them, but, what would happen is I would work with that particular elder because they used to go through the questions 2 or 3 times. 2 times I can remember. I think I went through it a 3rd time. But you have to go through the questions that they ask you. And you have to spout off all this Bible knowledge, which I did parrot fashion because that's what I'd had drilled into me all my life. So I could do it. I couldn't remember hardly any scriptures now, thank goodness. But that's what you had to do. And so there I am, going through these questions with these elders on my own, working on the doors with them on my own. I'm 15. And they're telling me, oh, you're doing really well, your scripture knowledge is brilliant, blah, 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 stuff I've been learning parrot fashion all my life. And so, yeah, you're ready for baptism. My sister knew about it because my sister was going to the meetings with me. So she knew about it. I was hiding all my stuff to go to the circuit assembly. As I say, to me, it just felt like a rite of passage. It meant that I could date boys, it sort of meant that you're, growing up, that's kind of, these two questions I can barely remember. I just knew I had to say yes to them, and it was, I think one of them was about repent of your sins, and the other one was about loyalty to Jehovah, and I can barely remember the questions. But you say yes to them. You can't even hear them when you're sitting there waiting for, because when you go, it's like when you go for your baptism, it's like a really special thing. You have a special area where you have to sit at the front of the assembly hall, because wherever they're holding the assembly. Mine was in Bowes Row Assembly Hall, and you have a special area where you sat, and everything's all building up to the baptism talk. And then do the baptism talk, and then they say, all the baptism candidates, will you rise? And you rise, and you stand up, and everybody claps you, and you're just like, oh, you feel like a celebrity. And then they ask you the questions, and you shout yes, even though you can't barely hear what the questions are, but you've been through them, so you know what to do. And bearing in mind, I've watched this ceremony from age dot. To me, I didn't really understand the significance of it. And I don't think any child under the age of 18 really understands what they're doing and what it means. Because what it actually means is you're officially a witness. But before you get baptized, you're not technically a witness. Even though if your parents, you're a child, you say, oh, I'm a Jehovah's Witness. Blah, blah. No, you're not. Legally, you're not. Or shouldn't be legally anyway, but you're not until you get baptized. And when you get baptized, that means that things like judicial committees, and if you've put a step wrong, that's when they start to get funny with you over things, things that you may have been looked over when you were little aren't anymore, because you're sort of considered an adult within the organisation. Even though there are children as young as 8, 9 getting baptised, just no, please don't, So there I am saying the questions. I was 15, and then we go behind the stage, and they play all this lovely music, and you go behind the stage. There's always cubicles. You get changed into your swim costume, and you put your t-shirt over the top, and it's all very so you're all nice and modest. And then the guy who actually baptised me was one of the guys who went through the questions with me, so that's he was one of the conspirators, if you know what I mean. So he got to dunk me, and so I came out, and everybody, when you've you come out during the lunchtime, and everybody's congratulating you and hugging you and love bombing you to death, and how wonderful it is, and then you get back to the hall, and people are giving you cards, people are giving you presents. I was just like, this is like having a birthday. I don't really understand what all the fuss is about. I just got baptised, that's all. That's what you do. I really didn't get that it was such a major thing. And so, like, thank you. I just felt a bit overwhelmed by it all, because I didn't really understand what I'd done. And so I kind of knew that I needed to hide all these cards, so I hid them in my room. Now, that was a bit silly, because a couple of months later, when I was actually about to go and meet my as I said, I've been putting feelers out in other congregations about finding accommodation so that I could go and stay with someone while I was at college. And they'd found a sister who was living on her own who would quite like to, she's a pioneer as well. So it's a lonely sister, pioneer, very nice, I was told. And she had a spare room, and that just seemed ideal, And the day I was actually going to go there, my mum found my baptism photograph, my baptism cards, and she went absolutely start raving bonkers. You don't know what you've done, blah 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 blah, and I was just, she just really didn't explain. She just went completely off the rails. And didn't really explain to me what it meant, And for me, I just couldn't. I knew she'd be angry, but I didn't think she'd be that angry. And I was banned from going to the meetings for a while, and I was, the sort of one of the elders was a bit sheepish about it. Well, maybe you should have told your mother, And it's like, yeah, but you guys didn't say that at the time. You guys didn't say, well, let's go round to your mum and have a chat with your mum. No, you didn't. You were quite happy to conspire with me into getting baptised, and then when it all falls flat, you say, oh, maybe you should have talked to your mother. Gaslighting or what? But anyway, we're getting there. So she went livid, wouldn't let me go. Wouldn't let me go to meetings for a while, and then she relented, let me go back, and then eventually we went to meet this sister. And this sister seemed lovely. She was a pioneer. She was a divorced lady, lived on her own, and she had a spare room, and she had a lovely, lovely little flat. It was the other side of the town from the college, but that didn't matter. I was going to be going to meetings and being a proper witness and everything, and it just seemed ideal. But things that seem ideal seldom are, and I really thought this was going to be, I was going to leave, everything was going to be wonderful. I was so looking forward to, being free of my parents. At last I'll be able to be a proper witness. I shall leave that bit until part 4. Okay, take care. Thank you for listening and sticking with it, and I shall speak to you soon.